Hello, everybody. Welcome to a special Readings from Oconomowaukee virtual event with Books and Company and Boswell Book Company. I am Daniel from Boswell, and with a very warm and witty introduction, Lisa Baudoin from Books and Company in Oconomowaukee.
I can be warm, but I don't know if I'll be witty today. So, welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming tonight. We're thrilled to have Jane Delury here. She's the author of The Hedge, which we'll be discussing tonight, and The Balcony, which won the Sue Kaufman Prize for the first fiction from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Her short stories and essays have appeared in multiple publications, including Granta, Real Simple, Lit Hub, and Poets and Writers. And that is quite a variety of places to be published. She is a professor at the University of Baltimore and teaches in the MFA in Creative Writing program and Publishing Arts. Originally from Sacramento, California, she now lives in Baltimore with her family. And for this special event, we are honored to have Liam Callanan, author of When in Rome, Paris by the Book, and The Cloud Atlas, to join us for the conversation. And Liam, thank you for coming and being part of this with your hedge and your tie.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes. And Jane, do you want to start with, say we just met on the elevator and I'm going to ask you what your book is all about? You want to give us a little elevator pitch?
Sure. Hedge is about a garden historian named Maud who grows up in the Bay Area and moves to England to study garden history. So she restores historic gardens back to their original state or as close as possible as she can get. And at the beginning of Hedge, she has moved back to the United States with her husband, an Englishman named Peter, and their two daughters, Ella and Louise. Ella is 13, Louise is 8. And Maud hasn't been able to find work in California. She's found no significant gardens to restore. She's very frustrated with her career, and she's very unhappy in her marriage. So at the beginning of the book, she tells Peter that she wants to separate. She travels across the country to the Hudson Valley to restore a Gilded Age garden at Montgomery Place, which is a real estate on the Bard campus today. And while she's there waiting for her girls to join her from California, she spends quite a bit of time with a man named Gabriel, who's an archaeologist who's working on a dig at the site. And they have romantic dinners together that get increasingly romantic. And Maud feels this new lease on life, both romantically and in her career. But then when her daughters come out from California, it's sort of a bucket of cold water on this budding romance. And Ella is harboring a very dark secret that ends up coming out and driving the family back to California. And in the second part of the book, Maud, which takes place 2 years later, Maud is restoring a garden at San Francisco's Presidio and kind of reckoning with what happened that summer and reckoning with her daughter, Ella, and their fraught relationship. And yeah, I'll stop there. More happens, but there you go. How was that? Did the elevator just go through 30 floors, or has it gone up and down the building twice?
We missed our stop because we were listening, which always happens to me.
We were so engaged that we missed our
I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. I love this duo, bookstore duo, and it's really wonderful to be here. And Liam, I'm a huge fan I'm an old friend of Liam's. We're getting old now. We really are old friends now. And I've been a big fan of his writing for forever. So it's really great. It's great to be here. So thanks.
He's been talking about you for years. Go ahead.
Yes, it's so wonderful to have you here in Milwaukee, even virtually. So I'm so excited to be here tonight. I have about 700 questions to ask, and I've blocked our Zoom channel till about 1 o'clock in the morning. So people who are tuning in should buckle in and get ready for the whole book to kind of unfold before your eyes. I definitely have some questions, but I'm also going to yield the microphone to Daniel and Lisa and maybe some other people who pass them in along the chat. I wanted to ask, well, first I want to ask if you want to read a paragraph of it, just to kind of get the voice of the text in the room. That might be fun. And then I was going to ask a couple questions about the origin of the book.
All right. Yes. Let's see. Okay. So I will read I'll read a paragraph from the second page of the book. So Maud is at Montgomery Place. The book opens, she's at Montgomery Place, and she has started working on the restoration of this garden. So this is a description of the site that she's working on. Where the lawn ended in a horseshoe of gravel, the building rose 3 stories, painted the color of milky tea, and frosted with cornices and floral festoons. A century ago, Montgomery Place had been one of the finest estates in New York's Hudson Valley, its grounds spreading for hundreds of acres through forest and field. This September, the gates would reopen with the mansion and grounds restored. Maud had been hired to turn back the clock to 1860 on the lawn she now crossed, once a labyrinthian formal garden. She planned to reseed the flower beds, remake the paths, and return the statues and urns to their positions. By mid-June, as the roots settled into the warming soil, she'd fill the conservatory with tropical plants.
Wonderful. I like you. It's a little chilly in Milwaukee. It's 12 degrees on the thermometer, a little cooler than that with the windmill. So it's nice to be returned to a sunnier and warmer climate, which I am here. This is not a background. I'm really here in front of this hedge, wherever you want it to be. But that does lead me to my first question, which is, Daniel said I had to do as many horticulturally related puns as possible over the course of the evening. So I wanted to ask you about the seeds of this book. How it came to be, where you started, because I know you yourself are quite a talented gardener, and I was kind of interested in how that kind of informed this beautiful book as you put it together.
Okay, yeah. I don't know that I don't know how talented I am, but I'm very passionate. I love gardening, and even though it's nice to have some snow, it will be really nice when it melts and I can get out there again. So the seeds for the book, I would say, the sort of emotional core of the story. I in my early 40s, I divorced. I had 2 young daughters, much like Maud. Things went much better for me than they do for her. But and I bought a house on my own. It was my first time sort of being on my own, because I had met my ex-husband when I was 20. And so there was a lot for me to learn about all kinds of things. But suddenly I was in this house, I had the girls part-time, and I couldn't do too much to the inside of the house, just financially. But what I could do is transform the really kind of crappy, small backyard into something as beautiful as I can make it. Because, if you buy enough plants, I found they start to get a little expensive, but generally they're a lot cheaper than a kitchen remodel. So I started spending a lot of time out there and just growing things, growing some food, growing flowers. And I really found this other passion that was kind of parallel to writing, except without the pressure to be good. And that was a real release for me. So I actually wrote the first draft of Hedge outside. My first book had come out. This was around 2019. And I went outside every morning and I just started drafting this book about a woman and her 2 daughters. This woman who is thinking about starting over again with her 2 daughters, and that's how that's sort of the garden connection. Then the historical angle, or the garden history angle, was really inspired by I'm from Sacramento, California, but I was born in San Francisco, and we have a lot of family in San Francisco. My family spends a lot of time there. And over the course of several summers, my mom rented a house on the edge of the Presidio, which is a former military base, and is now a absolutely beautiful park that maybe some of the people who are listening to this have seen. And I would go running. I could run back then. And I would go running in the mornings, and I came upon this archaeological dig of the home of Juana Briones, who is this incredible historical figure in California history. There's not much written about her. And archaeologists from Stanford found the footprint of her home, the home she shared with her father and her sisters. And I was so struck by this idea of what, the land or what the soil can tell us about the lives of people that lived in the place, people who, you know, in this case, she didn't write in English. There's really no written record of her life, even though she was this incredible entrepreneur with this incredible story who ended up being a very wealthy landowner and just absolutely fascinating woman. So that was sort of I think often with the book, there's the emotional nugget, and then there's sort of the intellectual, the curiosity about the world. And for me, that's often about history. And so that led me down the path of this practice of garden restoration and garden history. And I did a lot of research that was just so fun for me to do, much of which I had to cut out of the book, but it was so fun. It was a real richness to be able to do that. So.
Can I ask something about that? Because
Yeah.
you have, there's basically 3 gardens that she works on during the book,
Right.
but there's very little about the Virginia Woolf residence, which is like in the backstory. Is that the thing that got cut out?
No, I mean although, yeah, I mean, I basically thought, well, what garden could she work on in England? And I was like, I know, Monk's House. So yeah, I didn't write a ton about that. I did do quite a bit of reading about it, and I read a lot of Virginia Woolf. I mean, Virginia Woolf wrote about gardens and about flowers in particular so beautifully, and a lot of that was inspired by her gardens. So I did a lot of, I went down a lot of rabbit holes and did a lot of reading about that. But in terms of actual writing, it was more about sort of this. It was about some of the other gardens in England that Maud would have worked on. Also about Montgomery Place, because I did research on site and it was just so incredibly interesting to me. I found everything so interesting that I had a lot of detail that ended up, being stripped away. But then I'm currently putting into a PowerPoint, and I'm going to give a talk actually at a historic garden near Baltimore in the fall, and because it is so interesting. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I just find it so incredibly interesting. So
I'm going to pass the mic, but I'm just going to say that so many of the readers that we give this book to are really fascinated by all the history in there. And I just think a PowerPoint on some of the nonfiction aspects of the book would be amazing.
Yeah, great. Good. Well, I'll keep working on it.
And you should record it and have it up on your website, because I too, I'm a big gardener, and that part of it was really interesting.
Okay.
And
yeah, that's good to know.
I think that one of the things that struck me is how each garden sort of defined the stage she was in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And, the Gilded Age and that romance, and then coming back to California with just really having to get down to the bare bones and making life work. And, when she was off on her own in those rosy, cheery days at Monk's house with the girls and very romantic and sweet. Did that inform you, or did it just weave that way in when you were writing?
Yeah, I love the way you described that. I didn't really consciously, I think Maud is someone who she does get sucked into romance, but she's kind of aware of that risk, right? So even when she's at Montgomery Place, she's sort of aware, oh, I shouldn't, but then she kind of submits to the romance of this Gilded Age garden. California, the landscape of California is so different from that lush Hudson Valley environment. And so definitely when I had her go back to California, I was very aware of that she had lost sort of the ability to create the kind of garden that she was used to creating. California, I mean, San Francisco is less dry, but I'm from Sacramento and it's just so incredibly dry. It's such a dry kind of hostile environment in a lot of ways. And the plants are just, the native plants are just toughies that are surviving. So there's both the landscape itself, and then also her understanding of gardening and landscaping, I think, is changing through the book. So she's more aware of the artifice of what she's doing and the artifice of gardening in that second part of the book at the Presidio. And she's trying to learn about the native plants and find the beauty in those like tough survivors, as opposed to, you know, the roses that she's used to working with. So,
and the healing nature of those plants too, and the curandera aspects of that space.
right, which is another again, Juana Briones and was a healer and used the native plants of in particular yerba buena, which is this mint, which gave San Francisco its first name. So that was another, you know, when we talk about reading and research, there's such incredible, interesting history around, you know, the use of plants in indigenous culture in the Bay Area. I mean, there were so many communities that lived. There's not, you know, one, and the book goes into that. There's no one narrative, cultural narrative about the people who first lived by the Bay, but there is really interesting documentation about the use of plants. And that, again, you know, maybe that's 3 paragraphs in the book, but, you know, I have a lot of books about this stuff downstairs.
Well, it's also about, it seems to me, I'm green with envy at your writing.
Ooh,
There we go. I just keep going.
That was number 2.
That was number 2. Like Daniel said, I had to get to 70 by the time we were done. But it's true, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous book. And I think one of the things that I find so particularly interesting as a writer and as a reader is the attention it makes just not to making gardens, but also making art, making spaces of one's own. This and the previous book, The Balcony, it seems you have a particular knack for creating these kind of enclosed environments, these very kind of compressed worlds where characters find themselves facing difficult choices and having their autonomy kind of maybe shrunken a little bit. I don't want to sound too much like an English professor, but I was wondering if you could talk about that, like what you see in the worlds that you create.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just natural to me. I grew up in Sacramento. My father was a serious history buff. I mean, he got up at 5 o'clock in the morning to read history, and we didn't have a television until I was, I don't know, 11. And then we were allotted a half hour a week. So we read and we visited historical sites like around California. And then as I grew older, we started to travel, and I had a real, I felt a lot of pain at an early age over what was happening to the landscape around me. I mean, we were living sort of on the edge of the suburbs, and I just kind of watched the foothills being bulldozed over. And I think I got a lot of that from my dad. He was also older. He died when I was 16. So he had this sort of nostalgia for landscape that I think kind of transferred to me to a certain degree. So that's you know, I'm always looking for the excitement and the interest of place and places. And I've learned, you know, I used to travel a lot more internationally because in my first marriage, my ex-husband was French, and we would go to France a lot. And so, but even now, you know, I go to Virginia a lot. I go to the Shenandoah Valley. I spend a lot of time at Shenandoah National Park. And that's really where I find inspiration, is through natural settings, but also the culture within them, you know, the subcultures that you find, and the way that people interact with a landscape that has endured for centuries with some kind of stable population. So I do think that that's often where I find my stories. That was definitely true of The Balcony, and that's true in Hedge. And Maud and I we're not similar in a lot of ways, but I think that I really shared with her that interest in, or that, I don't know if it's ability, it's a sensibility to, you know, look at, you know, even I'll look at a shopping mall at Towson, this suburban shopping mall near us, and I'll kind of notice the hills, and I'll think, well, what was there before? Were there houses there? That's where my curiosity goes.
Yeah.
Have we talked? Oh, Daniel, I was going to say, have we talked about parenting yet? Because I really wanted to ask, this is an amazing love story, but it's a love story that we don't often read because it's a love story in familiar ways, but it's also the love between mothers and daughters. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about like the teenager, the tween character age, the daughters here are crafted so superbly. And so it's such an immersive relationship, and it's a difficult one. It's fraught, but it's beautiful. And I think that's a really difficult edge to ride. And I was just wondering how you came about doing it.
You're on mute. You're on mute, Daniel.
Before you answer that question, I just want to note that so many of the authors that we do who are connected to Liam, as well as Liam himself, have particularly interesting parent-daughter relationships, and often mother-daughter relationships. And so I feel like, because his novels also have very strong relationships of that sort. I was thinking of The Shore, and I was, so I'm curious. I was also very interested in that, and especially because you have at least one daughter yourself. If like how your kids reacted to the way you portrayed that relationship.
Yeah, well, we could bring them up. They're 2 floors down. I could bring them up and they could tell you live. Yeah. So Ella is struggling with some serious mental health issues in the book. Louise is more, she's kind of where most kids are at around the age of 7 or 8. She's a less sort of complicated character than Ella. I mean, ultimately, this is, for me, it's a book about a mother's love, and it's a book about a woman trying to navigate that love and find her independence. It's those two forces. So to answer the question about drawing those characters, I would say in the simple moments, it really is drawing on my life with my girls. I have so much fun with them. I mean, again, talking about landscape, we went away just this last weekend. It's college applications, and my eldest is 22 and she's starting to look for jobs. And it's just, we've all been very stressed out. And so, I said, let's just go away. And we went to the bay. It was super cold. And I was teaching my youngest to drive stick, and we actually went to find Frederick Douglass's birthplace. So we went on this sort of history tour on the Eastern Shore while she was trying to drive stick. And I just laughed so much, I laughed so much with them. I have so much fun with them. There's just this incredible joy that's a joy I just don't experience with anyone else in my life. And so I think that infuses the book. And yet it's also about a really difficult time. And although, again, our experience of having the family, separate, and now they have step parents, and that's going great, hallelujah. But, divorce is a very difficult transition. And so I talked to them as I was writing the book. I actually asked for their input. I would read them scenes sometimes, especially about Ella, who was going through so much. And the reader isn't privy to what is going on with Ella until the reader finds out, nor is Maud. We're very close to Maud's point of view and what she's not seeing. But I, as the writer, had to be aware of what was going on with Ella on every page. And my daughters actually really helped me with that. How would she be reacting to this? How is she reacting to watching, her mother clearly having something romantic going on with Gabriel? So they were very helpful that way. And then my youngest, I don't know, we can ask her. I don't know that she's read the whole book. But Margot, my daughter, I drove her back to school in Connecticut, and she read the novel right next to me, in the car. Yeah. On the way back to school. And I don't know, they're very supportive of my writing. I mean, occasionally the eldest Margot will say, people are going to think I'm Ella. So, it's a little sensitive, but they know that it's different enough from our lives, thank God, that it's been okay. Yeah.
I like the true sign of accuracy in terms of teenagers that a key plot point revolves around access to Wi-Fi.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, don't everyone tuning in, this is definitely about gardening and historic gardens and the rich history thereof, but Wi-Fi also key.
Yeah, just to contextualize, when they first arrive at Montgomery Place, there's no signal, which is true. I mean, when I went to Montgomery Place and was doing research, I of course thought this was incredibly wonderful. Oh, I can't check my email. I've moved back in time, but yeah, a 13-year-old would not find that so incredibly wonderful.
I know a lot of writers debate this, or oh, I'll yield to you. Are you having Wi-Fi problems, Daniel?
No, maybe. Go back to you.
Go to the tree.
I was just going to ask my students are obsessed with people who plot out books, or they just figure it out as they go along. I love that E.L. Doctorow quote, "Writing's like driving at night. You can only see as far as your headlights, but that's enough." Where are you on that spectrum of I figured all out in advance, or I let the book surprise me as I go?
Yeah, I feel like my headlights are often out too, but I'm still just trying to follow the road. Yeah, I don't plot out at all in advance. I'm a short story writer too. I love the form of the story. My first book, The Balcony, was a novel in stories, so every chapter is also a standalone short story. And I think you can kind of see what I mean if you read Hedge. It's a very compact, compressed narrative, but I just, as I described, writing the first draft, I knew there was going to be this cataclysm. I knew that this was going to seem like a romance novel that wouldn't be a romance novel. I knew the rug would get pulled out from under Maud in the middle. I didn't know that much about Gabriel. I didn't really know whether, where he fell on the good guy, bad guy spectrum. Like all of that I figured out in writing and rewriting. So and honestly, I would probably be a faster writer if I did, but I just never have. And I doubt I ever will. I mean, with ensuing drafts, then I would think, okay, I would start to think structurally, but I'm working on another like long project right now. And it's the same thing. I love that though. That's the most fun, is to, when you're just kind of just going with it. But then of course you have to turn it into something that with structure. So that's the work.
Yeah. You have to take out the hedge clippers.
Exactly. Or sometimes you have to take out the entire hedge and replant it, but there wasn't too much of that. But initially the book is chronological, but the first iteration was not chronological. It started with Maud in California, actually. So, there was restructuring that happened along the way.
I find a lot of books. Oh, go ahead. I'm just curious about the structural. Were you, was it your decision to make it more chronological? Because I've been just reading so many books that jump around in time a lot lately. Yeah. And sometimes you do wonder, like, what's the purpose in doing it, except to make it a little more complicated. But sometimes you see a through line of like a secret revelation or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually the very first draft, and that was a note from Don. So Don Lee, my husband, is my first reader, and Don, he asked the question, which I think is a really good way to give notes to a writer, is ask the question and let them answer it. And so with that question, when he said, why is this not chronological? I had no good answer. And sometimes when that's true, you start to think as the writer, well, why is it that way? And I think it created a little more, it's a very big plot. I'm dealing with a lot of plot in this book, and there's always that risk of melodrama. And so starting off in California with all the emotion that was not yet sort of earned by the narrative made the opening more, I think, melodramatic. And ultimately, when I flipped things and I started in Montgomery Place, it furthered that sense of being, connected to one set of eyes, right? Which in a third person close novel we are, but also experiencing with Maud the day that everything flips. And suddenly she thinks, wait, I've been getting absolutely everything wrong, which, as someone who she's trying to start out and create this new life for herself. So to suddenly have to question herself that deeply, it really sends her backward. It sends her spinning. And that's where, in the second part of the book, she's kind of getting back on her feet again. She has the same problems she had at the beginning, but she has to regain confidence in her own sense of truth, I think. For me, that's her journey. For me, this is again, it's a story of motherly love, but it is also a story of a woman who, it's a Bildungsroman about a woman in her 40s who's learning to, trust herself and say what she wants and to stop hedging so much.
Well, and that's what we were talking about, is at what point did the title come into your consciousness as the title? Because it's perfect.
Thank you. Yeah.
So many, I mean, all of its definitions, it's perfect.
Yeah, I'm not so great. I'm not so good at titles. I often have a lot of working titles. This one, the title came to me right away, but well, it came to me actually in Monticello. So a lot of the research I did at the beginning of the book, and it's on top of reading, I did at Monticello, which is a real cradle of landscape restoration and garden history, not only because of, Thomas Jefferson's note-taking about everything that happened in his garden, but because there was a huge restoration that happened in the 1970s where they pulled up a parking lot and, tested the soil and recreated the vegetable garden. But there's also this incredible archaeological work happening down the mountain in communities of the enslaved people who did all of the work on that beautiful, those beautiful gardens up on top of the mountains. So I had the privilege of spending time with Fraser Neiman, who's the head of archaeology at Monticello, and he just taught me so much about the science behind garden remains, basically, like what you can find, how you can discover patterns. So at Monticello, on my first visit, actually, when I'd emailed a bunch of people and said, I'm a writer and I'm working on this book, and they were so wonderful and welcomed me in, and I ended up going back quite a bit. But on that first visit, I was so struck by this anecdote. When the Monticello, when the mansion was restored, I think in the 1920s, it was like the Ladies Club of Virginia that oversaw this restoration. They planted a hedge all the way along Mulberry Row. So if you've been to Monticello, you know that Mulberry Row was the main, basically, street of the plantation, and it's where the enslaved community worked as blacksmiths, and there was a dairy, and now it's all been restored. There was a big grant, and there's, telling the lives of the people who lived on the mountain and did all of this work. But, the idea was to hide it. So you could walk through the mansion and not think about the fact that this was a plantation. And when that restoration of Mulberry Row took place, they didn't completely remove the hedge. They kept part of the hedge, but they took most of it down, as if it's to remember the history of hiding the history. And I just found that so incredibly evocative that it became my title. And so I think I was still working on Maud's character and figuring out a lot about her. And so I think in many ways, the title influenced the story, if that makes sense. The title influenced the character, because she does a lot of hedging. I think that might be her main flaw. She hedges too much, but yeah.
But she hedges so much based on how she grew up and when she grew up, and all of those sets of tools that we come with. Yeah, which are not chopping shears.
Right. And yeah, and she has a lot to deal with her parents. And, Liam, forgive me for saying this, but I think you're maybe a little less lapsed than I am. Irish Catholic, but that definitely, there isn't a ton about this in the book. I actually cut a lot of that out, but I was interested in the idea of someone, kind of like me, who was raised in a certain subculture, and then as an adult sort of looks at it and thinks, well, what do I actually believe? Like, what of this do I still want to follow? What do I want to impart to my children? And for her, it was complicated by the fact that her mother in particular, was not a very nice person. So that has nothing to do with being Irish Catholic, but this idea of inherited faith and morals. Maud has so much Catholic guilt, even though she would never, she knows she shouldn't. if that makes sense. Like, she thinks she's a feminist and she thinks she shouldn't feel all of these things, but she still does. And so how much of this stuff is just in our blood? I guess that's one of the things that I was interested in exploring too.
Oh, if Liam isn't going to talk about this, I have to mention we talked about this a lot in our book club discussion about the Catholic guilt in the story.
Oh, okay.
And so I didn't really know that you were Irish Catholic, but I'm like, she has to be something. Except of course the character in the book, but she just tries to take this chance and go out, and it basically just has to crawl back into her shell and devote her life to others for so much of the book. I mean, it's such an intensity about it all. So interesting to know that you were thinking about that.
Yeah,
because it's
really is. There was a line that I quoted earlier today to Jane, where Maud's reflecting, it's all in me, these people, these stories, these lies. And I feel like that really haunts her through the book, like what and what's true about it is like that on the one hand, it's completely a false burden for her to bear, like it's unwarranted Catholic guilt. On the other hand, there are some lies that she needs to process and exercise out of her, which I think is one of the great glories of the book, is kind of how it really revels in ambiguities, how things are simultaneously true and not true, which I think makes it all the more suspenseful for the reader, but also all the more powerful.
Oh, I love that. I think I saw in the chat that Don, who apparently is watching, I think he just gave the tidbit that my mother was a nun. Yes, my mother was a nun. Yeah, she was a Sister of Mercy for 7 years. I grew up in the like liberation theology, like cool 1960s Irish Catholic tradition. Maud is in a much more conservative. She grew up in a much more conservative world, but yeah. My mother was a nun will be the first line of my memoir if I ever write it.
Sign me up. There's also a lot of great dialogue in this book, and I was wondering how that came to be. Did you? I'm trying to think. The balcony wasn't necessarily as dialogue driven as this book, but I really feel like when she's sorting things out with Peter or Gabriel, or for that matter, even her daughters, dialogue really, the way people talk to each other and what they say and what they can't say, really powers a lot of the energy of the book.
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. I mean, I'm very comfortable in descriptive exposition. Like I could write pages and pages about, describing a garden. So, that doesn't necessarily come the most natural to me, but it ended up being a very scene-driven book, which kind of surprised me, because I think my stories and the balcony are not necessarily quite so much that way, right? I mean, I definitely, I often sprinkle in scenes, but with this book, I sort of felt, when I was looking at it and doing the revisions, I was like, oh my God, like we need some some meat between these scenes, because it was sort of like, boom, 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 boom. But that's how the book came out. Every book sort of decides what it's going to be at a certain point, and you start to follow. I mean, I did a lot of reading dialogue out loud with this one, I will say. And, some of this stuff is a little bit pulled from life too. So that was helpful. But yeah, I appreciate that. I'll never write so much dialogue again. So it's good that
you can't declare that
because you're great at it. Yeah.
Okay.
Never seen. One of the things that we found when we were discussing the book is how the book does really morph in terms of genres. It feels like it might be a romance, though I've learned it's not a genre romance, because there's no cheating in genre romances. You can't get a blurb from another romance writer if you have cheating. That's the romance people are telling me in the store, and then it becomes a family drama.
I guess the husband.
Well,
cheated.
this was the thing. She didn't cheat because she was, as we say in the world of Friends talk, she was on a break. But you know, there was arguing. Yeah, I agree with you. But it's but she's still, you know, I don't know. It depends what your vision of separation is, or how conservative you are about it. But then it winds up becoming also a friendship novel too. Both Lisa and I really like the character of Alice and the complication that brought to the story. Would you talk a little about, like, you had it in a different order, but the way it almost becomes like acts, the way you wrote it.
Yeah, no, you're right. It does. And Alice and Act 1 and Act 2, there's a lot of mirroring. So I think that so Alice is she was an artist who had quite a bit of fame, and she's from a very wealthy family, and she gives up her art, she gives up the money, she gives up that life, and she's really a hermit living on Highway 1 on the coast near San Francisco. And the reason Maud meets her is that Alice's father dies and she gets this inheritance and she's trying to just give it away. So she is the donor behind the project that Maud is doing at the Presidio. And the two of them are very different. Alice is an atheist. She's gay. She does not understand Catholicism, and Catholic guilt. And but with Gabriel, there was also that opposites attract thing going on, because Gabriel was this sort of nomad who had never been in a relationship, never been settled down with anyone, and Maud, who feels so sort of over-rooted in family, kind of found that interesting and attractive. And Alice has some of those same qualities of someone who, Alice has deliberately decided to just cut herself off from society in a lot of ways. And so she allows Maud to see a different way of being. Maud has never been, become close to someone who has such just different modes of functioning. The idea of being in a non-monogamous relationship, for example. So even though Maud thinks she's sort of evolved, she really isn't in a lot of ways. And I think Alice opens her eyes, but Alice gets a lot from the relationship too. And that was a real surprise. Alice, to see how the two of them sort of fall for each other. They fall for each other in friendship, but they take hikes together, and I really was sort of behind them on the trail. It was like I was writing about this eccentric donor, and then she says, "Do you want to go for a hike?" And I was like, what the hell is happening? It was one of those moments in writing the book where I was like, okay, I guess like they have something to say to each other. And then Alice was like, let's not talk. I don't like talking when I hike. So I was like, okay, maybe they'll say something to each other when they get to the summit. But yeah, that was a surprise. But again, I think Maud is in many ways back where she started in, that yearning for intimacy and that yearning for adventure is not going to go away. I guess you can't really contain that. And so even though she goes through a lot of hard things, and in many ways, this could be read as like Catholic punishment, you stray from the marriage. In the end, like if you read the book all the way through, I feel that she's really come into her own, and really great things are ahead for her. And Alice is a big part of that journey. And I really am really interested in women who don't play nice. I don't think I'm one of them. But that was something about Alice's character that just intrigued me, is that she does not feel the pressure to be super nice and smiley. She just kind of is who she is. So yeah, I liked her too.
It was a really nice surprise. She was one of I think she's my favorite character, and just for what she did and the development of that relationship.
Yeah.
Was she based on it? It was just so different from the other spaces.
Yeah. Again, because I'm sort of interested in women who don't play nice, I seem to sort of accumulate them in my life. So yes, there are some of them I know that she's very different from them in terms of for many reasons, but sort of that aspect of her personality. And then I was interested in an artist who gives it up, who decides I'm not doing this anymore. And as sure as, Liam, like we feel sometimes, right? Like, why am I doing this? Sometimes you stop and think, and then you keep doing it. But the idea of someone who, especially in her case, she was really doing well. I mean, her stuff was selling, and she just didn't like the public face of her. And so that I wanted to sort of explore with her too.
And the line where she sort of talks about why she opted out of being in the world and how she felt like she was playing all of these roles in this other bad girl way, instead of the roles of being the nice girl, and then deciding it and, becoming a hermit from it all to be herself instead of the pressure on all sides of being a woman, whatever you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah. She literally just gets up in the middle of an interview and just walks away and stops.
And doesn't answer questions. I mean, that was like that moment of like, oh, can you imagine?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm done with you all. And not only that, is I'm putting my artwork in a building that I can't even look at.
Right.
And it's going to be there, and I'll reveal it later when I want to.
Right. Yeah. 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 Oh, I'm glad you connected to her. I mean, again, someone who goes into the book expecting, oh, this romance is gonna, percolate, and then, everything's gonna go great. And then suddenly you're like hiking with Alice. I mean, it's the way the book came out, but yeah, it's just the way the book came out. And I didn't have all that in my head at all when I started writing it. So
it's interesting, that relationship or that friendship with Alice, that also comes that's not entirely unfraught too, because Alice has someone close to her who kind of accuses Maud of dislodging her. And there's a line in the book I love where Maud says something like she's madly in love with her children, but also in love with maybe Gabriel, and then she'd marry Peter. And isn't a woman allowed more than one mad love in her life, or something like that, which I just thought was a wonderful, wonderful line.
yeah.
Is Maud onto something there, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to, and I think it's hard for men too. I mean, this is very much a novel about a woman, but I think that anyone who's been a parent has probably had that question, right? It's so all-consuming, and there is so much incredible responsibility and incredible pressure. I mean, there's so much love and joy, but the flip side of that is that it's a weight, and I think that is something else that Maud find so interesting about Alice. Like, Alice has no interest in having children, and which is more and more, I mean, I know more and more people have decided not to have children. It's really interesting to me to have like so many friends who made the conscious decision, to not have children. But for someone like Maud, and probably someone like me, that just kind of wasn't a choice or a question. And I'm really glad I made the choices I did. But yeah, I think there are going to be a lot of really interesting novels about that, characters who have made a different choice. Yeah.
One of the things that Lisa and I were arguing about it was a continuation of my two other book club conversations was about Gabriel, and what exactly, like, I'm veering close to spoiler, but I don't want to get there. But so I want you to, in generality, just talk about, like, we were completely on different pages, as were different people in the groups, as to what exactly was happening with them post separation, especially when they have to kind of come to terms with what happened to them.
Do you mean that scene at the end, or what was actually that scene
on 273? We just read it together.
Yes. Well, now I want to know what the different opinions were. I'm so curious.
We'll tell you after the recording's over.
Yeah.
We want people to think. We don't want to tell people what to think about it, and just to know that, like so many of the, like a lot of things in the book, there's a lot of open to interpretation.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you don't give us answers, you give us questions a lot of times.
So I think, I mean, for me and people who have read the book will understand what I'm talking about. There are certain things that just seem unforgivable. And I think what happened with Maud and Gabriel is something that he finds unforgivable. And there's no going back from what she believed of him. And so, I mean, it's like, for me, that's the tragedy of that scene, actually. And he has his own flaws. I mean, he was very naive, he made mistakes, but fundamentally, I think there's just no going back. Having the person you love think that of you, there's just kind of no way back.
Okay. Well, you answered that one. But the thing about it is, because it's a close third, we really don't know how you talked about that you didn't know how good or bad a person he was going to be. Well, we really still don't know how good or bad a person. We know he's really good through Maud's eyes, but
Right. And we don't know what was happening, right? And she never will completely know. And I mean, Liam brought up ambiguity. I mean, there's so much ambiguity around teenage girls. I mean, I have 2 teenage daughters, and the way, I mean, one of them still a teenager, but I think one aspect that I was interested in exploring here is how when girls become teenagers, there's this new weirdness with some men. I mean, it's not all men, but I would sort of notice it, and they would sort of notice it, and we would talk about it. There's just this shift that happens. And so, where something isn't like wrong or isn't necessarily weird, but it's kind of a little odd. And so, yeah. So, I mean, I think the novel is sort of moving into that like gray area, where, yeah. I mean, I think I have a pretty good sense of what Gabriel's intentions were, but I also think he made mistakes, and sometimes, and sometimes we're not even totally aware of what we're doing. And I think with him, there was a little bit of that too.
I think another one of the skillful things you're doing in this book is even as you're showing Maud as a Bildungsroman, like her coming of age at midlife, you're also showing her 2 daughters growing up right before your eyes on the page. And so what Elle is thinking at any given point in time is informed by what she has just experienced and what she may yet experience. And so you really kind of catch a nice freeze frame of what it's like to be caught between 2 poles of like childhood and adulthood, and it's really lonely and scary out there. And you can see that through her eyes and how you painted her.
Yeah. Thank you.
I will say that your book has left me petrified that somebody under 18 will come up to me and say, "Don't tell my parents that, ... Like, I would just say, I'm going to run away screaming in the other direction.
Just don't provide Wi-Fi in your store.
I hear ya.
If they have Colleen Hoover, just walk away.
You're
Don't
fine.
see it.
You're good, Daniel.
We did have one question from your, I don't know, seemingly from Mimi. Do you identify as the rose or the tough indigenous transplant? I'm guessing you're going to understand what she means by that.
Oh, I see. Okay, interesting. So which of those plants do I identify?
Yes. If you were a plant.
Yes, if I were a plant. Huh. Is it weird that I'm thinking I'm like kind of a fucked up rose, like a rose that's like like missing half its petals and is a little like faded. Like that's how I answer that for what it's worth.
The wild native rose.
Yeah.
Not the cultivated English rose.
Maybe, yeah, thank you. That's a better way of saying it. Yeah. It's a funny question.
Yeah, I'm a bargain basement plant at a nursery center on clearance. What are you, Liam?
I'm a weeping willow. I like water. And this hair, right?
That's a good party question. Thank you, Mimi, for that. Good. Yeah, we all have to remember that for our next dinner party. It's a good icebreaker.
What plant would you identify as?
Yeah.
Do you have an answer, Lisa?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a tough one. I mean, and now we're talking about the wild rose that's all thorny and those beautiful blossoms and has a lovely smell. That's a good one to have.
Yeah. We can both be that. I like sharing that with you.
You can go hiking together as wild roses.
Yes. I'm telling you, I'm at Shenandoah National Park constantly. How far is that to Milwaukee? I don't know.
Lisa's a big
Not too
hiker.
Oh yeah?
I am. Yeah, my husband, my ex-husband's from Waynesboro, which is right there.
Oh, okay.
So we
Yeah.
would go back that way.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I love it there. It's so beautiful. I actually,
it is.
I go there and I hike and I write. I do sort of a solo retreat there. And I actually did 2 rounds of revision on Hedge in a cabin in the park. So,
Oh, nice.
Jane, we didn't practice this question, but it might be a nice one to wrap things up with. Do you have other books about gardens, gardening, hedges that you have been recommending, or that you encountered during research, or that you've seen on shelves while touring, or just other things that you've been talking about and hyping to people?
yeah, well that, I guess I should. Now I'm going to have to, I don't know. I'm drawing a blank on the gardening books. I mean, a lot of them were sort of historic tomes.
Right.
I mean, like kind of written in the 18th century. I did Penelope Lively has a beautiful book about gardens that I would definitely recommend. And then Virginia Woolf's journals are so beautiful, and the way that she writes about gardens in those were really inspiring to me. So I guess those are the 2 that come to mind. Yeah, and then I would just say learning about these places in the book, because again, I
Right.
couldn't go into them that much. But if anyone gets to the Hudson Valley, I mean, Montgomery Place is just this incredibly beautiful, lost in time place that people know the gardens of the Hudson Valley and the famous estates, but I think not that many people go there. And so I would really encourage people to check it out. Every time I went there, aside from Amy Perella, who's the head of the grounds at Bard, who would meet me, or I worked with a few people there, but I was always the only person there, which was so incredible and wonderful. I would just I'd walk for 2 hours and there was nobody else. And it's right at the foot of the Hudson River. And it's just absolutely beautiful. So, and Juana Briones, read about her, because she was just incredible. She has an incredible story. And I hope somebody writes a novel with her in it, because that is an incredible story.
Sign us up.
Yeah.
And sign us up for your presentation. Is it going to be at Longwood or Winterthur, or?
It's at Ladue Gardens, which
Okay.
which is also something to look up. It's a really lovely garden that's about 30 minutes from Baltimore. So yeah, okay. So thank you for the inspiration on the PowerPoint. I'm going to keep working on the PowerPoint. Yeah.
We'll look for it. And you're at janedelury.com, right?
I'm an org, Liam. I'm a nonprofit, apparently.
You are a nonprofit. You're a center of the universe too.
Or am I? No, wait a minute. Am I at Jane Delury? No, you're right. I am a com. I'm a com now. I'm at jane.com. That's my email as an org. But yeah, are you checking right now, Liam? Are you looking me up?
I'm actually putting in the link for everyone to check.
Yeah.
I just looked at your page. What a beautiful, beautiful page.
It is.
You are .com, so you're not an org, I'm afraid.
More kudos to Don Lee for that page. Yeah. man of many talents.
Hooray. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We have a link to purchase the book from Boswell or Books and Company, or whatever your favorite independent bookstore was, or if you've already read the book, which many of you have, just buy another one for somebody else. Thank you, Liam, for a wonderful conversation. We look forward to another one in about a month with Margot, and we'll also be talking in about a month, Lisa. But I hope we'll talk before then, because we have a lot more books to argue about. Thanks for everyone joining us. Hope to see you in another event. And this event is recorded, so we'll have send a recording out in a couple of days, and we hope that you'll post it and share it with other people. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you so much. This is great.